Hi, I'm Simon. Thanks for tuning into The Ordinary Filmmaker. Subscribe to get notification of new videos like this one so you don't miss any news, rumors, gear reviews, or tutorials. And to make things a little bit more exciting, I'm giving away a brand new Canon EOS R5 full-frame mirrorless camera to one lucky viewer. Details are in the description down below, or you can watch this video here. But please look at the terms and conditions, as there are some age and location restrictions. And now for this week's news. Canon's releasing 4 video cameras this year. The XF505 will replace the XF205, and the XC20 will replace the XC10 and 15. But a new entry-level cinema camera that we've been talking about for a while now, the C50, is also coming out, along with an 8K cinema camera, named to be determined later. But a much bigger announcement is coming. Canon Rumors says a source with a stellar track record has told me that Canon will announce more lenses at once than ever before. The lenses will have different shipping dates, but Canon's going to make a massive splash with a new camera and many, many lenses. Now, I'm willing to bet that the massive splash is something that can only come from a full-size camera like the R1. What do you think? Let me know in the comments section down below. Canon's going to be announcing more lenses than ever before in a single event. This is a list of the lenses that we think could be announced at midsummer. Wow, it's a lot of them, isn't it? Now, I'm really interested to see how much the 1200mm will cost, but let's be honest here, I'm probably going to end up with a lens like the 100mm macro, which really excites me. I really love the EF version of that lens. Hopefully the focus motor is quiet enough that I can use it for video. Canon will also be introducing a new menu system with the R1. Yet, allow us to keep the old menu system and be able to toggle back and forth. We'll just have to see how that one pans out. No mention if the new menu system will be made available for the Canon EOS R5 or R6 in a future firmware update or not. Only time will tell. And on Thursday, we got some crazy R1 leaked specs. Yeah, take a look at those. Those are them there. Canon sees the 1 series as their flagship stills hybrid camera. That's always been the case. It's aimed at fast action sports photographers, and everything about it, well, everything about the camera that is architected for speed. These rumored specs, they seem to just talk to high resolution and the low light monster. Not really sure they're speaking to that primary use case or primary scenarios. They don't holistically add up to me, but I could be wrong. What do you think? Well, one thing is for sure, that's 3 leaks on the Canon R1 in as many days. Looks like Canon's getting ready to leak the daylights out of the R1 and drive the news cycle again in 2021 like they did in 2020 with the R5. I really do wish Sony would do the same with the A7 IV. A7 IV, sorry. No, there's no A7s IV yet. Yeah, no, I didn't leak that intentionally. I do not have any inside news on an A7s IV. Okay, so let's get back to things. I really do wish Sony would start leaking things a little bit more. The Alpha 1 is a great camera, but if only they could have started leaking news right around November, because that's when things really started to slow down on the channel. It would give us a lot more to talk about. On a personal note, Sony loaned me the A7s III for 2 weeks. I've been shooting with it every day since I got it, and I decided to make this week's AMA video all about the A7s III and the Canon R5. It's kind of hard to look at one of these cameras without looking at the other. Now, to be honest with you, I love both cameras, and in a perfect world, I'd love to have both of them in my studio. And I am working on an in-depth camera that is going to basically look at each of these, and it's coming out next week. But the one thing I want to say, and what I find interesting in some of the comments, I get comments saying, when I talk about something that's negative to either one, they say, yeah, you know, that's why this Canon's better or the Sony's better. And I think what's really important is when we look at these cameras, we look at it from the capabilities that they can deliver us. And the way I see it is, you know, if the Sony has better capabilities, it doesn't make the Canon a bad camera. It just means that the Sony's better in those capabilities, whereas the Canon's better with other capabilities. It's not like these cameras are designed for the same exact actors or user groups. They're not. They're designed differently. And it's no surprise that the A7s III is designed more for video, with some strong stills capabilities, just like the R5 is a very heavily focused stills camera with some strong video capabilities. Anyhow, the days are getting longer, the snow's melting, and my spirits are starting to lift. Even though it's about -9 outside right now, it's sunny. I issued a challenge last weekend. Go out there, capture spring, life's rebirth in a video form, and submit it in the comment section down below for this video here. The winner gets to take home an Angelbird 512GB CF Express card, a CF Express card reader, and an ordinary Filmmaker ball cap. Not this particular one, but one that looks exactly like it. And then I'll be offering up 4 ball caps to the runner-ups. But please do watch the video and read the terms and conditions, because there are some age restrictions and location restrictions. But other than that, the contest is open up planet-wide. Like staying informed and learning about camera gear? Visit ordinaryfilmmaker.com, or you can subscribe through YouTube's notification system. And that way you'll get notified as soon as the videos are pushed, so you don't miss any news or rumors. But now it's time to answer your questions. Got a question for next week's video? Post it in the comment section down below, and I might be answering your question next week. And now for our first question. Stop the FOMO asks, did you compare how fast or slow each camera is to edit while having the same resolution bit depth at their highest 4K video quality? Well, that depends. If I wasn't recording with Canon log or Sony log, then yeah, I could edit no problem. There was no skipped frames whatsoever. But I'm also using a 2017 iMac Pro, and it's a beast of a machine. It doesn't have the M1 processor in it, but it's still very fast. But as soon as I started editing with Canon log or Sony log, it would drop frames pretty frequently. I still didn't transcode for the YouTube videos. Essentially what I did was just keep editing. I would edit at twice the normal speed, and if it dropped a few frames, it didn't really matter, because I was more, this is a talking head video, I'm more concerned with what I'm saying, that I'm pulling out any swearing that I do when I don't get the take right for about 30 times or something like that. But it wasn't really enough of an issue to slow me down. Now, where it definitely slowed me down was in the export process. C-Log is 940 megabits per second, and Sony log in 10-bit or 10-bit is 600 megabits, and that's a huge amount of data. So it does have an impact. Now, from what I've seen with the M processor or the M1 processor, you can get a $1,300 MacBook Air, and it's going to be able to edit these files buttery smooth without any issues whatsoever. But yeah, for me, again, I'm dealing with a pretty beefy machine, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But from what I understand, Canon log out of the R5 isn't the easiest to edit, and even some people are having trouble with a 4K 30 because of just the sheer amount of data. And this is something that I became very well aware of. This video that I'm shooting right now is recorded in, I think it's around 200 to 225 megabits per second. So it's so easy to edit, and the detail is pretty good. So I've stuck with that since I'm doing the studio pieces. When I shoot with a Canon R5, though, I'm shooting with 4K HQ, and that's 570 megabits per second. It's 2.5 times the size. 2.5 times the amount of information. That's more information that I have to process. That means exporting is a little bit longer and a little bit slower. So it's kind of like a menu. You got to choose, do I want to have something really tasty and not worry about counting calories, or do I want to have something really healthy? It's the same with the cameras. When I sit down, I figure out, well, what's the quality I'm looking for, and what kind of storage do I need? Do I need an external recorder? Because that's one of the problems I've noticed with the Sony, is when I do shoot in 600 megabits per second, 128 gig card isn't going to last very long, and the CF Express Type A with a maximum size of 160, and while yes, you can record from one to the other, it's still not a lot of space. I can quite easily blow through 300 gigabytes in one AMA recording. It's not uncommon. Quite often, I found that I need about 500 gigs. So I pretty much need to go to an external recorder. And I love the Sony. I love the fact that I don't have to worry about record times. I don't have to worry about power. Right out of the box, the thing is good to go for as long as I need it. But the storage is an issue. CF Express Type A cards are very expensive, and they're not very big. So the way to get around that is to go with a Sony, or not Sony, with a Ninja external recorder. They started around $599, and on the Black Friday sale, they usually drop 20% to $499. And how much does a CF Express Type A card cost? $400 for 160 gigs. So that's a good reason to get an external recorder if you have the Sony. Now for Canon, for the R5, a good reason to get the external recorder is the record limits and the overheat limit. So, not a perfect world by any stretch, but I personally have a place in my heart for both cameras. I think they're both great for different reasons. Name Under Construction asks, Has anybody found a good laptop on the Windows side that can smoothly play and edit R5 log footage without having to make proxies? Would prefer not to have to get a MacBook. Well, what you essentially need is you need a video card that's capable of handling 422 4K video. I mean, that's it. But a lot of the video cards don't. They do 420, they do 444, but 422, they don't. And that's one of the reasons why it's so slow. I understand your hesitance to go Mac. Once you're in the system, it is pretty closed. You can't upgrade memory. You can't upgrade any components unless you're willing to spend something in like a stupid amount, like $10,000 on a Mac Pro, which is severely overpriced for the capabilities it can do. I think one of those new MacBook Airs, the M1, can outperform the new Mac Pro, which is absolutely ridiculous. But here's my suggestion to you. Try to find a video card that can easily handle HEVC or H.265 422, and if so, you're going to be okay. Otherwise, maybe just consider getting one of the low-end MacBook Airs and get yourself an 8 gig version. They're not too expensive. You can get one for around, what, $1,500 with, 512 gigs, and then do all your editing on an external drive like I do. So if the laptop fails or whatever, you've got all your files. But the speed of these things, to be able to take R5 footage at C-Log, you're talking about 940 megabits per second and edit it like it's nothing. It's going to take a while for Intel to catch up. I mean, Apple's been producing these M processors essentially for, what, about 10 years now, and where's Intel? If anything, I think we're going to see something coming from Microsoft before we do Intel. Microsoft's starting up their own chip fab or chip design. They'll probably outsource it to some other company like Apple does. But yeah, if you're going to stick with Windows, keep an eye out with what Microsoft's up to, because I think they're going to develop their own ARM processors, and but still, it's going to take a few years, But the good news is, if you do get a Mac, you're not going to have to spend more than about $1,500 with a machine that can easily edit 4K HQ C-Log. Sebastian asks, what's the main differences between editing on the R5 and the A7s III? Do any of the cameras have advantages in post that you prefer? Well, Sebastian, the A7s III is able to edit their log files so much smoother than the Canon. With the R5, if you're recording anything in C-Log on the R5, it is just, you're going to drop frames. Now, for me, it wasn't that big of a deal, and I'll tell you why. Because I've got an iMac Pro, it's very fast to begin with. Sure, I'm dropping frames, but it doesn't impact my workflow, not for YouTube, because what I'm essentially doing is I'm playing back at twice the normal speed. I'm looking for glitches. I'm looking to see if I say something wrong, and I'm looking for my next insert point or my edit point. I don't need clear video where I'm not dropping frames. It doesn't matter to the kind of work that I'm doing for the channel. Now, for my personal stuff, it does matter. So what I do anyways is I transcode all the files ahead of time, so I'm editing in Apple ProRes. That gives me the most detailed files that I can work with. It's an editing codec, and I'm very happy with it. So in that case, it doesn't really affect me one way or the other. Even with a Sony, I convert them to Apple ProRes when I'm doing my personal stuff. But what I do like about Sony, I wasn't too happy when I first looked at Sony and go like, 200 megabits, 100 megabits, this can't be that good. But you've been watching these videos for the better part of a week now. They've all been recorded in a 4K video mode that's around 200 to 225 megabits per second, and it looks pretty good. And as far as editing on my iMac, even though they're using LongOp, or maybe it's not LongOp, it's definitely an IPB type compression, editing hasn't been an issue at all. So I've certainly enjoyed editing with the Sony. Let's put it this way, the Sony hasn't given me any red flags, but when editing with the R5, it's a whole different caliber. You're getting file sizes that are so much bigger, and if you edit in 8K RAW, I think you're looking at, what, 3,500 megabits per second? The sheer size of these files is truly horrendous. But you're getting detail, and if you want detail, don't blame a duck for quacking, and this is where it's kind of hard to compare these cameras side by side because they are meant for different scenarios. I mean, the Sony can't do 8K video, the Canon R5 can. Yes, you've got the overheat, right? But it's more about what are the capabilities you're looking for in a camera. John asks, I've been storing most of my files on a 4 terabyte external drive. Now that I'm doing 4K in Canon log, that drive is starting to fill up. I'm looking at external SSDs and RAIDs. It must be a drive that I can edit video and photos from. What do you recommend, SSD versus RAID, or some other option, and why? Okay, so you're encountering the exact same problems I did, John. So I knew that when I was going to go 4K, it was going to be horrendous. And this was long before Canon was even, there was even a rumor of the R5. I bought the iMac Pro back in 2018, knowing that I was going to do 4K the next year. I knew no matter what happened, I was buying a 4K capable camera. And 4K requires a lot of processing, so I got the iMac Pro. But I also knew that the storage wasn't going to be sufficient. I wasn't going to pay Apple's steep tax for like a 4 terabyte internal storage, even if it was available. And back then, you couldn't even buy a 4 terabyte SSD for, I think, under $1,000. It was absolutely ridiculous. But then, this past Black Friday, there was a sale on a 4 terabyte drive, and I knew one way or another I had to get a 4 terabyte drive, because every year I produce a 1 hour to, well, no, it's more of a 90-minute film of my family, basically going from December all the way up to the end of November, life in the day of our family, watching my son grow and all that sort of stuff. And for that video, I make sure everything's high quality. I'm shooting with a bit rate of 940 megabits. So that's Canon log 4K HQ, got a lot of detail. So here I am at the end of February, about a week into March. The file size for the project is already 1.6 terabytes. And a 4 terabyte drive. Now granted, that is about 39 minutes. There was an awful lot to record despite the shutdown, but it's only a 4 terabyte drive. And why did I end up with that? Why didn't I get a RAID? Well, let's talk about RAIDs, because I've had RAIDs in the past. Now most RAIDs, you're going to put in what do they call inexpensive disks, like a 1, 2, 4, 8 terabyte spinning disk. Well, I had one of those, and I had an 8 drive array. I basically got a Windows machine, and I put an Adaptec card. I forgot what they call what the card it was, but it had 8 slots in it, and I did a RAID 5. Today I would do a RAID 6. I did RAID 5, and basically you're able to exceed the speeds you would get with a standard SATA SSD, so you can exceed 500 megabits per second. So for each drive you add, the faster it gets. And the sweet spot I found was around 5 or 6 drives, and you just get, your write speeds are just blindingly fast, and that's what you need. It's more than fast for editing video. But here's the problem. Let's say you get it. Most of these enclosures are 3, 4, 5, or 6. I had 8. But here's the thing. You get 8 of those drives. You want to populate them all right away. You don't want to put in a drive later and then redo the array, because it can take days. And here's what happened if a drive fails. I had 1 terabyte, and when a drive failed, it took about 12 hours plus to rebuild the array. And this is with a dedicated hardware-based RAID. Now, flash forward to when I was using up 80% of the array, it took, I think it was 2 days to rebuild the array. And here's the problem with that. All your redundancy goes completely out the door once a drive fails for whatever reason. Sometimes a drive doesn't fail itself, there's some sort of error, and it has to rebuild the drive. You have now lost all protection, and unless you're backing up to tape, which is another added expense, that's a potential issue. And of course, I was looking at about $2,000 plus for building that system. Now you can get Shinobi? No, it's not Shinobi. I can't remember all the names, but you can buy these RAID enclosures that have 4, 5, and 6 drive bays, and they'll say, oh, you can easily get 64 terabytes or whatever it is, but they're selling you 8 terabyte drives, and you look at the rebuild times I had with the 1 terabytes, you start putting in 4 terabytes, your rebuild times are going to be in days, and if you have a failure at that point, all data's gone. So I didn't really see RAID worth the cost. I decided, you know what, this year I'm just going to go ahead and buy a 4 terabyte SSD and, you know, take my chances. The YouTube stuff I don't back up at all. But there is another option. A lot of these RAID drives are now supporting M2 SSDs, which is really good. So now you can put in, like, let's say a 4 terabyte, and you're going to have rebuild times that are quicker than a 1 terabyte spinning disk. But the cost for doing such a system, like, again, look what a 4 terabyte costs. Even look what a 2 terabyte costs. And if you look what a 1 terabyte costs and you just put in 4 of these, you're no better off than buying a 4 terabyte drive in terms of cost and benefits. So at this point, I am playing a little bit of Russian roulette. I'm just sticking with that 4 terabyte Evo drive. It's a pretty reliable one. It was one of the, it's good quality, and at the time Angelbird didn't have a 4 terabyte, and I checked the other day, they still don't have a 4 terabyte drive, and I want something that's reliable, but I want something that's big. Coming up to the end of this year, I'm going to want something like an 8 terabyte, and I might have to relook at coming up with a RAID array, but if I do, it's going to have to be pure SSD or M2 SSDs. Spinning disks, they're too slow. Yes, they're great. Everything's working well, but once you have a problem, you start to go into panic mode. Oh, and the other thing you need to buy too, if you do get a RAID array, you need some sort of external power backup. And here's the thing, you've got to assess, what are the blackouts like in your area? Do they last for minutes, hours? Because then you need to get some sort of backup power supply that can last you as long as you need to overcome that blackout so you don't lose everything. Because here in the summer, we get blackouts or brownouts all the time. They don't last very long, but, it just becomes a very expensive proposition. So I hope I've answered your question. Right now, I'm just using like a Samsung Evo 4 terabyte. New Idea asks, on the R5, what's the difference between 4K HQ and 4K DCI? I've always been confused as to whether those recording options are the same. Also, if they are different, where in the menu system is the 4K HQ option? I only had the opportunity to test the R5 once, so I don't know the camera well, but I'm considering the upgrade in a few years. Okay, so let me explain the R5 menu system for choosing frame rates and resolutions. Once you go into the camera, you look at where you have the menus. It's under the camera icon, and it's the first page. And what you'll see there is you'll get to choose 8K, 4KU, 4KD, FHD, and I don't have it in front of me, but that's pretty much what it is. You'll have 8KU and HKD. And what the D stands for is DCI, and DCI stands for Digital Cinema Initiatives. And what that should tell you right there, cinema. The difference between DCI and UHD is, well, what it's intended for, the intended audience. Cinema has a different frame rate, or sorry, a different resolution. It's, 4096 by 2160. Now, what you're watching on is probably a smartphone, television, or a laptop, and all these devices are sold using a UHD resolution, and that's 3860 by 2160. So you have more lines this way than you do this way. It's just how it is. It's what kind of look you're going for. For most options, I never shoot DCI. I just shoot UHD, and that's perfectly fine. So what does the HQ mode mean? Well, 4K HQ is you're shooting in 4K in what is called high quality mode. And what you'll notice is before you go into this screen recording resolution, there'll be an option there for high speed or high quality. Now you can choose one or the other. You can either choose to shoot at 120 frames per second in 4K, which is high speed, or you can choose to shoot in high quality mode. Now when you enable high quality mode, that means you're now shooting in 4K HQ. So when you go in and select your resolution, you choose 4KU, you choose 29 or 24 or 25 frames per second, you choose all I or IPB, and if you select enable high quality mode previously, you're now getting a much more detailed image, because what it's doing is it's taking that entire 45 megapixel sensor, which is 8K of video, and it's downsampling it, compressing it in camera, using all sorts of fancy math to give you a much more detailed image. And I got to tell you, if you are considering the R5, 4K HQ is so amazing. Now, I shot with the Canon 70D right up there on the top shelf there for about 7 years, and my wife got used to the videos I put out. Now, my wife isn't technical at all. She couldn't care less. She just knows, oh, it's a computer, it's a camera, so what? But the first time I put a video that I'd shot on about the R5 and HQ, and I put it up on the television, which is a 4K set, it's a good quality set, so you can see the difference. She said, wow, that's a huge difference. And it really is. 4K HQ is just an incredible, the quality you get out of it is incredible. So again, let's recap. The difference between 4K HQ and 4K DCI, well, it's really the wrong question. What you're getting confused over is what is the difference between UHD and DCI. So if you're recording for YouTube, if you're recording to put on your own television, you're going to record in 4K UHD. Look at all the monitors that are out there being sold, they're UHD. DCI is more for cinema, so if you're doing real cinema type work, you're doing stuff for Netflix, you might want to consider doing DCI. And again, 4K HQ, the HQ just stands for its high quality mode, and that's something you enable before you go in to choose the screen resolution and refresh rate. Ali asks, which camera produces better pics quality in low light and outdoors? Better dynamic range in photo? Well, it shouldn't be really any surprise that the Sony A7S III has better low light, but when it comes to stills, the Canon wins hands down. It is engineered primarily for professional photographers. It's got that 45 megapixel sensor. It produces very good high resolution. And while the Sony A7S III does have better low light, if you compare it to the R5, let's say you're shooting in 45 megapixels and you have a little bit of noise. Well, all you have to do in post is crop that down to 30 megapixels and that noise starts to disappear because as you compress down, noise is reduced. And that's one of the great things about downsampling is not only do you get more detail, but you also appear to reduce the amount of noise. So yes, the A7S III does have better low light, but when you're talking stills, the R5 just has so many more capabilities. You can take some great shots. You can take some really amazing photos of portraits with the Sony A7S III. It's just incredible. The depth of field, the bokeh is truly incredible, especially with a 28-70 f2.8. But once you start to punch in, you're limited into what you can punch into because it is 12 megapixels versus 45 megapixels. So if you're a stills person primarily, then you're going to want the Canon EOS R5. But if you're primarily a video shooter and you're an ordinary filmmaker, you're a mom, dad, brother, sister, son or daughter, and you want to be able to take good photos while you're out shooting video, well, then the A7S III is most likely going to be good enough for you. It's just a matter of what are the outcomes that you need. And if you need really good photos and really good video, well, you might be considering getting two separate cameras. And for example, the R5 can do both very good video and very good photos, but depending on what climate you're in, once you're done shooting photos, you're not going to have very much time left to shoot video. And I got to tell you, even in Canada where we only have 2 months of heat, if I was a wedding or event photographer in summer, I would not be able to rely on the R5 for shooting video, not if I was shooting photos for a good part of the day. And I've done many videos, and you can easily get 30 minutes of 4K HQ before it overheats. But if you shoot a bunch of photos and then it says you've got 5 minutes left, you really don't know if you've got 5 minutes left, 6 minutes left, 10 minutes left. And you don't want to go into a shoot where you can't retake later on something that's not as reliable. So you really got to understand the capabilities. Anyhow, let's go on to our next question. Angelo asks, I'm interested to know the dynamic range compared to both cameras, R5 in 8K RAW with C-Log2. Well, first of all, there is no C-Log2 option for the Canon R5 right now. You only have Canon Log 1, but we're supposed to be getting Canon Log 3 in a firmware update. Let me take a look at your question here. So dynamic range. Okay, so let's just be honest and upfront. I'm going to get right to the answer here. The Sony A7S III has better dynamic range. It's about a stop better, and that might not seem like a lot, but if you shoot a lot of low light, you shoot a lot at night, that could make a difference to you. I haven't shot a lot in low light, but when I did shoot it, I was pretty impressed. Now, you have to shoot in log on both cameras, so Sony log and Canon log, to really get that extra dynamic range. You're not going to get it in 8-bit. Last October, Halloween, we couldn't go out, everywhere shut down, so I hid chocolates around the backyard. And in the backyard, all we have are these little LED lights, and they're pretty limited. Like me, with my eyesight, with my dynamic range, I'm outside. If I put a candy bar on the ground, I couldn't see it unless it was more than a couple of feet in front of me. I mean, it's pretty dark. There was no moon at all. There were no clouds. It was pitch dark. So those lights really didn't help. But if you see this video right here, you can see how well the R5 performs in low light. It does a pretty good job. Yes, there's noise there. But for me and the capabilities I'm looking for, it wasn't too much of a concern. And what you have to ask yourself is, what matters to you more? What type of shooting scenarios are you going to do? Are you going to be shooting video most of the time? Are you going to be shooting photos most of the time? And even if you get the A7S III, are you going to be shooting Sony log all the time? A lot of people that shoot log, they don't shoot it all the time, but what they do shoot is when there's high contrast scenes, so the editing's much quicker, especially for YouTube. I don't have the time to edit all the time. Sometimes I'm shooting in my lunch break, and when you shoot in your lunch break, you've only got a limited amount of time, so you know what? You're not going to shoot log. You're going to go with an IPB just because it's a whole lot quicker. So some of those decisions come in, but the Sony is definitely better in low light performance. But as you can see here, this was shot in 4K HQ with Canon log. And you notice those little blue UFOs there? That's because I left my UV0 filter on there. I should have taken it off, but I forgot. But it's for family videos, so it wasn't too bad. But even with the smoke, I was quite impressed with the footage, and it's more than usable. Sure, it's a little bit noisy, but you know what? When you're sitting about 4 or 5 feet back from the television on a 52-inch, you don't notice it. You just notice, wow, how everything comes alive. And, you know, and of course, if you're shooting 8K RAW, you've got a whole lot more freedom to edit things around. So yes, the A7s III is definitely better in terms of low light performance, but the R5 isn't going to let you down. But you just, again, you got to be shooting in log, because I shot outside without log and the footage was terrible. I pretty well had to toss it out. Di asks, currently the only way to dual record on the R5 is if you shoot 8K RAW and choose proxy. Is it possible to have a firmware update that can allow dual 4K recording on the R5? Well, if you look at the amount of bandwidth that's being pushed when you're shooting 8K RAW and dumping out the proxy file, which is a 4K video file, you're not asking the R5 to do any more effort. In fact, it's doing less. So yes, Canon could do this in a firmware update. Is it on a roadmap to do? I don't know. The camera that I'm filming on right now, Canon, if you're listening, the Sony A7s III has dual card slots. And you can record to both cards at the same time, so that video redundancy, or you can record to one, and then if it fills up, it goes directly to the next card slot, which really helps if you don't have a lot of big cards. That's really helpful. So yeah, it's definitely not a hardware issue. It's just the willingness to make this change. And look at how long it's taking to get the firmware update out. It was supposed to be out sometime in February, but that's been delayed a month or two. Canon is just, they're fighting so many battles right now. They're finally starting to get a handle of their production issues, and we should be getting back to a bit more of a normal situation. But if this does come, I don't expect it to come anytime soon. I haven't heard any word of it, but yeah, it would be nice. Jenny asks, do you think Canon will get the R5 IBIS to work as good as the A7s III does? Or is that something that can be fixed in firmware update like they did with the overheating problem? Well, actually, I think you've got it the other way around. What I've noticed is, and if you look at it side by side, the Canon EOS R5, the IBIS is smoother. It's a little bit better than the Sony. I'm not saying the Sony's bad, but the IBIS on the Canon R5 is better. You really notice this in video. But again, what are you trying to produce? What are the outcomes? Because you know what? I thought IBIS was the be-all and end-all. I thought it was the way to get buttery smooth video, and it's not. Now, if you're shooting stills, this is where IBIS really, really comes in. You can shoot in low light with settings that you couldn't do previously. You would get blur, but because it's able to hold that sensor steady, you can get great sharp photos in low light. But for video, when I want really buttery smooth slow motion, I always grab my Crane 2S, which I have sitting over there. I took the R5, or I took the Sony out the other week, and I was just surprised at how smooth it isn't. And I did the same with the R5, and yep, it's not very smooth compared to the footage you get with something like a Crane 2S, which is around $500. And I did a video on it, this one right here, and I was just impressed with how much smoother it gives you. So if your end capability is to have really good, really smooth video, it doesn't really matter which one has better IBIS. You're looking at getting something like a Crane 2S gimbal. It's the only way to get that really smooth cinematic look. Chewy asks, with Sony making their menu much more user-friendly with the A7s III, which camera do you think is more intuitive? Well, that really depends. So for me, coming from Canon, I didn't find it as intuitive because, well, it's different. But if I was starting out and I was looking at the R5 or the A7s III, I'd probably have about the same level of difficulty. Each of these cameras is packed with tons of information, and it's going to take a little getting used to. But here's a good test. So I've been shooting with the R5 for about the better part of a year now. And when I got the Sony A7s III, at first, yeah, I was a little unsure. I had to race to get it set up because I wanted to shoot a video within that hour. And I got pretty well everything set up. I figured out how to do things, but I did call a friend. I said, look, I don't understand what these two things mean, and I didn't want to go looking for a manual because it didn't come with a manual. It was a loaner. And he quickly answered the question, and I was ready to go. But you know what, now I can pick up the Sony A7s III and I know where to go. I'm starting to feel at home with it. And this is just over a week later. Sony's done a tremendous job. If you look at the A7 III, it's terrible. There's no rhyme or reason for it. It's like they took all the capabilities, shook them up, dropped them in the menu, and that's how they appear. Now, I still think there's room for improvement with both cameras, but I wouldn't tell you not to buy a Sony now because of the menu system. I think it's much improved, and I think it's pretty good. So yeah, don't let the menu system stop you from buying either of these cameras. Pat asks, how can you change the ISO on the A7s III without going into the menu? I'd like to see the histogram while changing it, thanks. Okay, well, the very simple thing to do is both of these cameras that we're talking about today allow you to customize buttons. So why don't you take that back wheel and reassign it to ISO, and then you're going to be able to adjust the ISO and also look at the effects on the histogram, and that's covered. Because I do the same with the R5, only actually, no, you know what I do? Because a lot of times I'm shooting outside, I have an ND filter on it. So I put the settings that I want, the shutter speed, the f-stop, and the ISO, and then, you know, I will adjust the ND filter, and you can really fine-tune it to get the histograms right where you want them. So that's another approach too. And our last question is from Waytech. How good is the R5's 4K HQ, 4K 60, and 120 frames per second compared to the A7s III? Well, first of all, there is no equivalent to 4K HQ on the Sony. The sensor is built just to handle 4K, so you're getting 4K full sensor. You do have better low light, but the Canon with 8K downsampled 4K, you just can't beat the detail there. It's so much more, it's more detailed than the Sony, but that doesn't mean to say that the Sony isn't very sharp. It produces really good results. But when it comes to 120 frames per second and 60 frames per second, well, the Sony beats out the Canon R5 in terms of detail. So it depends on where you're going to be spending most of your time shooting. Now, I do love 4K 120 frames per second. It's beautiful. It's a tool I use. I don't use it more than about 5 times a year, but when I do use it, I certainly do appreciate it. And I do see a good amount of detail, but usually when I'm doing 4K 120, I'm separating the subject from the background, so you're not going to get a whole lot of detail other than the subject. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. And that brings us to the end of another AMA video. And there's a couple of things I want to talk to you guys about this week before I close off the video. The first thing is, I was planning on shooting this outside. It's beautiful outside. I can see it now. It's still sunny. I had all my gear right at the back door, ready to go outside as soon as lunch kicked over and I was finished my meetings. Well, as soon as I went outside, I took the tripod outside with the camera and I immediately turned around and came right back in. It wasn't that cold. It was only about, what, -4, 5, 6, something like that. But the wind was crazy. And then I looked up and I saw the trees. Now, there's no leaves on these trees, and they were moving back and forth like crazy. So that gives you an idea of how fast the winds were. And I thought, you know what, there's no way I can shoot this outside, even though I really wanted to shoot this AMA video on the Sony A7s III outside with S-Log. So I'm a little bit disappointed. I need to come up with an excuse to go ahead and shoot it this weekend, but the weather's not looking any better. But that's March, that's spring here in Canada. You really don't get to choose your weather. So that being said, I am inside shooting on the A7s III once again. But there's a few other things I want to talk to you about. Number 2 is ordinaryfilmmaker.com. Go ahead and check out the domain name. I'm going to have a few more services coming. Now, the first thing you can do right now is if you want to get notified of videos as they come out, go ahead and put in your information, and you can either get a text or email address. But I know what you're thinking. Well, wait a minute, Simon, I can already do that with YouTube. And yes, you can. But I've had a ton of complaints saying that YouTube is not quick at sending out the notifications, or some people aren't getting notifications at all. If I put out multiple videos in a day, they're not getting the notifications, or whatever number of complaints that I get on this. So the first service I wanted to offer was a notification service where you will get a video notification or a notification of a video being published immediately after it's uploaded to YouTube. It's completely automatic. It also updates to Twitter, and I'm going to be updating to Facebook and Instagram soon too. So that's what I really like about this. But yeah, you'll get notification right away. Even if YouTube's having issues, you won't. You'll get notification, so you can show up first and be the first one to put out a comment that says first. What is the thing about having the first comment? I don't understand this. Maybe somebody can let me know in the comment section down below. I just personally don't understand it. But anyhow, if you want to do that, go ahead and sign up. Now, what's going to be coming very shortly is I'm going to have some merchandise. This hat is going to be the first piece of merchandise showing up. They're over here on the floor here. I've got several hats that I've been sent, and they were all pretty low quality, whereas this one here, the quality of it is very good. It's a denim material, and it's kind of an olive gray, and it's just a professional feel, a professional looking hat. It just feels like it's a quality product. So we finally found a source that's got access to this exact same brand, because right on the back it says exactly what it is. It's 47 and the other information on here so they can get that. So hopefully next week I will have a copy, and then that will be showing up on ordinaryfilmmaker.com as well. And then I'll have more merchandise. But wait, there's more. I'll also be doing some engagement activities. A lot of you are always watching my videos, you're commenting, you've been with me a long time, you've subscribed to the channel. And what I'm coming up with is a system that will give you points for commenting, for watching videos. And then over time, you can use these points to, well, get discounts off merchandise for one, but you can also use these points to, well, here's an idea of what I've got planned. Maybe once a month, I'll do a 30-minute private video, like an AMA video, where it's just me and those of you that have earned enough points to enter into it. Or maybe we'll do enough points where you can actually have a one-on-one with me for 15, 30 minutes, or even an hour. So we've got all sorts of different ideas planned. So keep an eye on ordinaryfilmmaker.com. From time to time, I'm going to be upgrading that and adding new features and capabilities. So that's something we're pretty excited about. And the last thing I want to talk to you about is a Sony A7s III. I want to do a brief recap. I've had it for a full week now. And the one thing I want to say first off is, as soon as I got it, I was pretty excited. And then all of a sudden, I had a video I was planning to do. I was going to shoot it on the R5. And I thought, oh, can I get this camera ready and shoot within an hour? I really had an hour to do it. So the first thing I did is check the battery. The battery looked good. Now, obviously, this is kind of funny. I had trouble putting the battery in. I tried this way, I tried that way, I turned around, and it seemed opposite to the way I would expect it to go in. So I finally get the battery to go in, I close the door, and the door's not snapping closed. And if you're a Sony A7s III owner, you know what I'm talking about. You actually have to, that little opener, you actually have to close it to close the door. I know what some of you are thinking. Well, Simon, when you go out of your front door to your house, don't you have to close the front door? It doesn't automatically close for you, does it? No, it doesn't. But these are some of the things I got used to when I got things set up. I was doing 4K 30 frames per second. I got the image set up. I chose basically a very simple, I didn't even use S-Cinetone. I didn't use any of the profiles. I just wanted to go as natural as possible. And I was pretty happy with the results. Now, after a couple of days of using this, I got to the point where, you know, the menu system on the A7s III, it's pretty intuitive. Sure, I could go through that and I could probably come up with a better organization as well, and as I could with the Canon R5 too. There's a few things such as the resolution and refresh rates, and why do we have to enable high quality for 4K HQ, and why do we have to enable high frame rates in a separate area for the other frame rates and resolutions, right? Stuff like that. But you know, for me in a week to basically get the feel of the A7s III, and this morning I thought, well, if I'm going to be shooting outside, there's no way on a 128 gig card I'm going to have enough space to shoot this thing with S-Log. So I thought, well, let's put the other card in. And oh yeah, that's right. Sony not only allows you to hot swap cards, which is pretty cool, but you can have it record from one to the other. And that gave me enough space that I figured, okay, even with S-Log, 10-bit 422 and all that sort of stuff, I won't have any problems filling things up. So I don't know, after a week, I feel pretty comfortable with the Sony A7s III. And here's what I really like about it. Right off the bat, I can relax. There's no time limit. There's no overheat limit. And as soon as you buy the Sony A7s III, if you want to record as long as you want, you can, because you can charge the phone through the USB, you can charge the camera through the USB, and you can also power it through USB too. So it's, and I can do the same with a Canon, but I had to go out and spend about $200 Canadian in parts to be able to do it. So that's from a user endpoint, or sorry, from a customer experience point of view, this plays really, really high. I think that's really terrific. I think Sony's done a really good job with the A7s III, and the quality of the camera in terms of what it can produce is pretty good too. So I'm really glad I got the chance to use this camera, the Sony A7s III. It's been pretty easy to get used to. It's been a lot of fun to work with. And it hasn't been any more difficult to edit and post than the Canon, and it hasn't been any easier either. When I shot with S-Log, it wasn't any easier to edit than it was with Canon Log. It would drop frames, so I'd either have to render it in ProRes 422, which I didn't, or just tolerate it, because I've got a big enough of a beast of a machine there, the iMac Pro. It's a 2017 model, that even with a few drop frames for editing purposes, it's more than fine. But I also I'm actually quite impressed with the quality here. I thought it was around 200, 225 megabits per second. But the mode that I'm shooting on right now, it's 140 megabits per second. And this is just evidence for those of you who think that, IPB isn't very good and you have to have all eye. For talking head scenes like I'm doing here, then yes, IPB is more than capable enough. But if I'm shooting a naturescape scene and where everything's in focus, or if I'm shooting fast action, that's where I'm going to want to use all eye. That's when I want the most detail possible. That's when I want to shoot S-Log or Canon Log. And those things really just give you as much detail as you want. And you know what? When you're in post, when you're editing on the computer, the last thing you ever want to do is look at that video and go like, oh, I should have shot it in log. Or, you know what? I should have shot that in high quality mode. Or I should have done this. Or I should have chosen this profile. You want to get as much detail as you can, so when you shoot, you're happy with it. And then you can always downsample and post. You can always, well, you know what, I'm going to change this, or I'm going to add this profile. Because if you start off with a basic profile, which is what I do, then once you get into post, you can add color grading to change it. But if you pick one of those profiles when you shoot, it's very difficult to undo it later. What else do I want to talk about with the Sony A7s III on a brief recap? This is not my full review on it. So I talked about the door yet. Oh, and full-size HDMI. I find it so frustrating that the Canon R5, a good camera as it is, they decided to give us a micro, not a mini, but a micro HDMI. And you have to use, where is it here? Do I have it? Yeah, you have to use this cable protector, or you're going to risk damaging the camera. I already sent it into repair once because the mic jack got a little loose. So yeah, definitely use these. The Sony comes with one too, so you want to use these. It's very, very important. But to be fair too, on the Sony, one of the things I did notice a bit of an issue, CF cards or storage in general. When you're shooting at 600 megabits per second, 128 gig card is not going to be good enough. 256 is not going to be good enough. But the problem is once you get into V90 cards, they are almost as expensive as CF Express cards. I looked at getting a CF Express card Type A because that's what the A7s III uses, and they're around $400 US each. That's pretty pricey. I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. That just seems silly. And I kind of wish I had these, the Atomos Ninja 5, because with the Atomos Ninja 5, storage becomes really cheap. You put that on the back of the Sony A7s III. Now you can get, for what, $70, you can get a Samsung 1 terabyte Evo, and you can edit right off of that when you bring it over to your computer too. So if you do a lot of shoots like this where you're shooting 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time and you want the really high quality detail out of the Sony, then consider getting the Ninja 5. It will pay it off very, very quickly in terms of the cost you're saving on cards. And if you're just a regular ordinary filmmaker and you're shooting family scenes and that kind of stuff, then you know what? Those V90 cards, or sorry, the V30 cards will work absolutely fine too. So for the Canon R5, we get a Ninja 5 to help eliminate that nasty record limit, which we don't need anymore. It overcomes that overheating in a lot of modes, so there's that benefit too. And of course, again, you still have relatively cheap editing. Now, the cost of memory on the R5 is a whole lot cheaper. I got a 2 terabyte Angelbird CF Express card. It's $900, but it's 2 terabytes. So yes, it's still more expensive than a Ninja 5, but I wanted to get that so when I travel, I've got plenty of storage inside the camera, because I'm not going to travel with family with this Ninja 5 sitting on top of it. It's just not going to be a pleasurable experience. But that's really what I wanted to talk to you about here today. I am going to do a full review comparing the A7s III to the R5. And if you haven't already sensed, well, it's not going to be saying either one is going to be the clear winner. It's going to be looking at the capabilities that I'm looking for in a camera as an ordinary filmmaker, as well as somebody who does YouTube, and then identifying all those capabilities and then saying, okay, for the R5, this is how well it matches the capabilities I'm looking for. And then for the A7s III, this is how well it does. And I'll line them up side by side using a heat map so you can visually see how well they are. And then I can take it a step further and say, okay, these are the mandatory capabilities. Do both cameras work? Or, better still, in which scenarios does the R5 win and in which scenarios does the A7s III win? And based on how many checkpoints you get, determines which is the best camera for any particular given scenario. And that's the best way of doing it. I don't believe in going, okay, 1 point to Canon, 1 point to Sony because you got this right, or one. It's silly. That point system doesn't help you make a decision. So that's coming up. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. Don't forget to subscribe for your chance to win 2 Angelbird 128GB AV Pro MK2 V90 SD cards, which would be very useful inside the Sony A7s III. I'm also giving away an Angelbird dual UHS2, a dual, I almost said CF Express card, a dual UHS2 SD card reader. Or you could also win a Ulanzi LED light package where you could win, there's several different lights, there's 5 in total. There's underwater lights, there's accent lights, and various flat panel lights that you can use for lighting your subject or for starting your own YouTube channel. I'll be awarding those 2 prize bundles once the channel reaches 30,000 subscribers, which based at current rate may not take much more than a couple of months. And then I'll be awarding different prize bundles all the way up to 100,000, at which point I'll be awarding a brand new Canon EOS R5 full-frame mirrorless camera to 1 lucky viewer. And on that bombshell, thank you so much for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. We'll see you again soon.